The first scream came from the bakery. A roof collapsed. Then another. Within minutes, the streets filled with people, running blind through falling ash. The sky was gone. The air burned. A mother tripped, dropped her child, turned back, but couldn't find him in the smoke. No one knew which way was out. Every breath sliced like glass. And still, they kept moving, because stopping meant dying standing up. This wasn't a disaster. It was a hunt. The mountain had become a predator, and Pompeii its prey. If you value the record, subscribe, because when the ledger closes, the bones still speak. Hours earlier, the city had been alive. The scent of fresh bread drifted through narrow streets. Merchants shouted prices for olives and wine. Heat shimmered off marble courtyards. Children splashed water from fountains that never stopped flowing. To its citizens, Pompeii was proof that Rome's order could outlast chaos itself. Then, without warning, the ground convulsed. Walls shuddered. Amphorae crashed from shelves. People paused, waited, and when the tremor passed, they laughed. Pompeii had felt quakes before. The gods were restless, that was all. But the mountain was already opening. A column of ash tore upward, turning noon to twilight. Pebbles rained from the sky. Men covered their heads with baskets, women with shawls. No one yet understood they were breathing death. Microscopic shards of volcanic glass slicing through lungs, turning every gasp into injury. By the first hour, roofs began to buckle. Horses screamed in their stalls. Dogs broke free and ran. People stumbled through drifts of ash waist-deep, coughing until their throats bled. They shouted each other's names, but the sound died in the roar. One soldier tried to lead his family toward the sea. He tied cloth over his son's face, lifted him onto his shoulders, and stepped into the grey. When rescuers found them centuries later, both were fused together, a single shape of desperation and dust. Inside the city, others hid indoors, believing stone walls would save them. They sealed shutters, prayed to Jupiter, clutched silver charms. The ash piled higher, cutting off air. In the darkness, some clawed at doors, some clawed at their own throats. They left behind gouges in wood and plaster, the handwriting of panic. By dusk, Pompeii no longer existed as a city. It was a furnace of choking air and falling stone. People collapsed mid-step, frozen by the same force that erased them. When silence finally returned, it was absolute, a silence so complete that even the gods seemed dead. And yet, beneath meters of ash, their outlines remained. Bodies curled, hands lifted, mouths open. Not statues, testimonies. Proof that an empire can promise eternity and still vanish between two breaths. By late afternoon, the ash no longer fell like snow. It fell like stone. Each grain carried the weight of fire. The city groaned under it. Roof beams cracked, columns split, and marble statues, once the pride of Pompeii, shattered where they stood. The air was unrecognizable. What had been blue that morning was now a solid wall of grey. Light came from nowhere and everywhere at once, a kind of blind glow, thick enough to touch, heavy enough to suffocate. People shouted for family, for gods, for directions that no longer existed. The sound was swallowed instantly by the storm. A witness in nearby Misenum later wrote, "It was as if the world was shrinking into itself, the sea receding, the mountains rising, the air turning solid. That man survived. Pompeii did not." In the Forum, panic turned to paralysis. Some citizens gathered at the temple steps, clutching idols, waiting for the priests to speak. But the priests were gone. Those who had preached divine protection were already dead, crushed in their own sanctuaries. Merchants dragged chests of coins into the street, abandoning them moments later when they realized gold couldn't buy air. Slaves broke their chains and fled, only to collapse within sight of their masters' villas. For the first time, Pompeii's hierarchy dissolved. The empire's entire social order, slave, noble, soldier, merchant, was now equal under ash. A baker's apprentice tried to lead his younger sister toward the gate of Herculaneum. They held hands until visibility disappeared. When excavators found them centuries later, they were 3 meters apart, turned toward each other, mouths open, as if calling out across time. Inside the houses, air turned into poison. As ash poured through broken roofs, the temperature climbed past boiling. People wrapped wet cloths around their faces, thinking it would help. It didn't. The ash burned through fabric, skin, and lungs alike. Children hid under beds, suffocating quietly while parents clawed at blocked doorways. In the barracks, a group of gladiators were found still chained to their cells. Their keepers had fled, leaving them locked inside. Some were found curled against the bars, their muscles contracted from the heat. Iron doesn't melt at those temperatures, but flesh does. The mountain didn't just destroy the city, it studied it. Every collapse, every breath, every instant of fear was recorded in ash, layer by layer, second by second, as if nature itself were keeping minutes of the empire's last day. By evening, the first pyroclastic surge descended. A wave of gas and molten dust, faster than a storm, hotter than flame. It struck the city with the force of a god's breath. No one outran it. The first surge boiled the river, ignited roofs, and turned bodies into silhouettes. Death came not as agony, but as instant petrification. Muscles seizing, eyes bursting, hearts stopping mid-beat. In less than a second, Pompeii became a gallery of final gestures. The second surge followed minutes later. It buried everything, bodies, buildings, prayers, under 12 feet of ash. The last thing the city heard was the sound of itself collapsing. And then, nothing. No birds, no voices, no wind, only the slow settling of dust over shapes that used to breathe. The next morning, when the sun finally broke through the cloud, there was no city left to receive it. Only a grey plain where streets once ran, a smooth crust where fountains once sang. Rome never sent rescue. They didn't even know what had happened. News travelled too slowly, the empire too vast. By the time messengers arrived, Pompeii was already a rumour, a caution, not a tragedy. Centuries later, when excavations began, the city returned exactly as it had died. Mid-motion, mid-fear, mid-prayer. Archaeologists poured plaster into the hollow voids where bodies had decayed, pulling up the shapes of their last breaths. A mother clutching her baby, a man covering his face, a dog twisting in its chain. The casts were not monuments. They were evidence, frozen proof that civilization can be erased in an afternoon and remembered forever in agony. We call it a natural disaster. But there was nothing natural about how the people of Pompeii died. They died because they trusted the system more than their senses, because the empire taught them obedience, not escape. Because when the sky turned to stone, they waited for permission to run. That is the real cost of civilization, the comfort that kills faster than fire. By midnight, Pompeii was no longer burning. It was suffocating. The air had turned into a substance, thicker than smoke, hotter than steam. Every breath scraped the throat raw. People wrapped linen around their faces, soaked it in wine, prayed it would filter the ash. It didn't. Wine only burned faster than water. Inside one villa, a senator's wife tried to keep her children calm. She told them the gods were cleansing the world, that after the storm they'd wake in paradise. She was half right. They did wake, centuries later, cast in plaster, huddled in the corner of their dining room. Their paradise was geological. The city had gone silent again, not peaceful, but strangled. Ash muffled everything, screams, footsteps, the sound of collapsing roofs. Even death made no echo. People who tried to shout inhaled instead. Their lungs filled, their voices died, and they folded into the ground like figures made of clay. In the streets, outlines piled on outlines, bodies covering doorways, alley mouths, staircases. Paths that once led to freedom now led only into other dead. A group of soldiers tried to form a line, shouting orders no one could hear. When archaeologists found them, they were still in formation, shields locked, heads bowed, frozen as if waiting for command. Discipline to the last breath. Rome had trained them well. Across town, a small tavern still burned. Its wine jars exploded in the heat, spraying the walls with streaks of molten red. In the back room, the tavern keeper and his wife crouched beneath a table. She had pressed her face into his chest to breathe through his tunic. He had one arm over her head. They died that way, together, inhaling the same last gasp. The ash did something extraordinary. It preserved intention. Every motion, every fear, every futile instinct hardened into stone. A human archive, written not in ink but in breath. By the second hour of darkness, the volcano began to roar again. The ground quivered like a drum. A distant boom rolled across the bay, then a flash, brighter than lightning, split the clouds. The third surge was coming. Those who had fled toward the sea saw it first. A black wall, glowing from within, racing down the slope at the speed of sound. It wasn't smoke, it was death moving sideways. A fisherman standing at the shoreline never had time to turn. When they found him, his bones were fused into glass. The temperature had reached nearly 500 pyroclastic, hot enough to vaporize blood. The surge swept through Pompeii in seconds. It boiled water inside wells, shattered glass, and carbonized wood. People who had survived hours of ash never saw it coming. They were standing one moment, shadows the next. And yet, even annihilation had a pattern. In house after house, the same shapes appeared. Bodies facing doorways, arms raised, mouths open. It was as if everyone in Pompeii had the same final thought: breathe. The city died synchronized. After the surge, only the mountain moved. It rumbled softly, like a satisfied beast, exhaling what was left of its prey. Then came the stillness. Ash continued to fall, gentle again, covering everything it had killed. Street by street, Pompeii was buried in silence 100 generations deep. In the empire's capital, festivals continued. Messengers spoke of tremors, not extinction. To Rome, Pompeii was a minor province, a small dot on the ledger of taxation. When the emperor finally heard, he ordered prayers, not aid. The bureaucracy of faith replaced the urgency of mercy. For a world built on documentation, there was no record of the screams, only receipts, only census lists suddenly missing thousands of names. History recorded the eruption. It never recorded the asphyxiation. Centuries later, when excavators uncovered the site, they found not skeletons, but stories. Ribs caught mid-breath, hands frozen mid-reach, ash hardened around faces twisted in the instant before silence. The plaster casts became mirrors. You don't just see Romans, you see yourself. Because suffocation isn't ancient. It's the same silence that follows every catastrophe we ignore. Pompeii was not destroyed in a day. It was silenced minute by minute, breath by breath, while its people trusted that someone, somewhere, still had control. That's the truth the ash remembers. Not how they died, but how long they believed they wouldn't. When the ash finally settled, Pompeii no longer existed. But the empire's accounting system did. Within weeks, clerks in Rome began adjusting ledgers. Trade routes rerouted, property titles reassigned, tax quotas recalculated. A city had vanished, and the bureaucracy treated it as a correction. To the empire, Pompeii wasn't tragedy. It was an entry. A loss column on a spreadsheet of marble and grain. No relief funds were dispatched. No public mourning declared. Rome's attention moved to the next census, the next war, the next shipment of Egyptian wheat. Because in the Roman mind, calamity was not interruption, it was cost of business. The empire's machinery thrived on denial. Everything had to appear orderly, even extinction. So, officials invented explanations that preserved Rome's perfection. The gods had cleansed an immoral city, the mountain had purged excess, the dead had been offered to Vulcan himself. Religion became accounting, sacrifice balancing the books of faith. On official tablets recovered centuries later, we find evidence of this logic. Tax records continued for years listing Pompeiani absentes, the absent of Pompeii, as if they were citizens simply late in paying. The state couldn't afford ghosts. It turned them into statistics. Far from the ruins, in marble halls, senators debated whether to rebuild. Reconstruction would cost too much, one said. Besides, the land was fertile now, enriched by ash. Another proposed auctioning it to aristocrats who might revive the region. Pompeii's tomb became real estate. Within a decade, villas were rising again on the same soil that had cooked the old ones. And beneath them, the dead remained, perfectly preserved, watching. Economically, the disaster was profitable. The eruption fertilized the Bay of Naples, making vineyards more productive than ever. Wine prices doubled. The Roman treasury, taxed the boom. In Rome, merchants toasted the bounty of the southern coast, never naming what lay beneath it. Civilization, after all, is expert at recycling its own ruins. But there was another ledger, unspoken and unpaid, the psychological one. Across the empire, rumors spread of cities vanishing in daylight. Superstition spiked. Inscriptions asking the gods for protection multiplied. Yet the government responded not with warning systems, but with theatre. The following year, the emperor hosted games dedicated to Vulcan, the god of fire. 10,000 spectators watched actors reenact eruptions on stage, lava painted crimson, smoke released from bronze machines. The audience cheered as papier-mâché towns burned. Rome transformed catastrophe into spectacle, fear into entertainment, pain into policy. That transformation is the essence of power, the ability to rename horror until it becomes pride, the ability to declare nothing went wrong, the gods simply demanded payment. And in that logic, Pompeii was not a warning. It was proof that Rome still ruled, even in death. The empire had lost a city and gained a myth. That order always prevails, that even nature obeys Rome's narrative. But beneath that illusion was rot, because every act of denial leaves residue, a silence that accumulates until it cracks. Archaeology is simply the moment when denial finally runs out of ground to bury itself. Centuries later, when the city was rediscovered, the first thing uncovered was not gold or temples. It was graffiti. Scrawled on a wall near the Forum, "Enjoy life while you can, tomorrow is uncertain." It had been written days before the eruption, a warning from someone who had already felt the tremors, ignored, erased, and preserved. It reads now like prophecy, or indictment. Because the truth is, Rome didn't lose Pompeii, it abandoned it. And that abandonment was no accident, it was design. The system that promised order was incapable of empathy. Its perfection depended on forgetting. When the mountain buried Pompeii, it also buried proof of how an empire could normalize suffering until it felt like routine. And when modern archaeologists dig it up, they are not excavating tragedy, they are excavating the paperwork of indifference. Pompeii didn't die only because a volcano erupted. It died because an empire decided silence was easier to govern than grief. That's the real economy of denial, pain unacknowledged, counted as progress. In Rome, law survived everything, even the dead. After the eruption, the empire's jurists faced a question no scroll had answered before. What happens to a city that ceases to exist? Who owns what when every witness has turned to dust? The answer, as always, was simple. The state does. Under Roman law, when a citizen died without heirs, their estate reverted to the treasury, the fiscus. Pompeii gave it thousands of estates overnight, a legal windfall. Within months, scribes in Capua and Rome drafted documents transferring ownership of entire neighborhoods, houses, farms, warehouses, to the imperial accounts. No one questioned it. There was no one left to. In the empire's ledgers, the language was cold and precise. Res absumpta igne, property removed by fire. No mention of the bodies still beneath the floors. The law didn't record grief, it recorded transfer. To the Roman mind, this wasn't cruelty, it was order. Law existed to make the chaotic world legible, even when that world was ash. Magistrates debated whether Pompeians should be declared mortui civitate, dead by the city. It was a legal category that erased citizenship itself, converting the victims from persons into resources. The empire had invented a way to govern extinction. The first archaeologists to study Roman records were astonished by their neatness. Each confiscated property marked by seal and date, each account balanced. There were no notes of mourning, no signs of hesitation. It was as if the bureaucracy had calmly watched an entire population vanish and said, "All debts settled." The Roman legal machine was efficient because it had no concept of tragedy. Tragedy, after all, couldn't be taxed. A few families tried to reclaim their lost lands decades later. They produced fragments of wills, testimonies, records of purchase. None of it mattered. Without the original owner to appear in court, the claim could not stand. The law required presence, and Pompeii had none. So even memory became inadmissible evidence. This was how Rome conquered twice, first with legions, then with parchment. The process of confiscation even extended to human remains. Roman law recognized property in bodies, not sentiment. If valuables were found upon the dead, they were catalogued, stored, and eventually auctioned for the benefit of the treasury. Gold rings, brooches, even bronze cooking pots melted into state bullion. One report recorded 13 pounds of metal recovered from the southern quarter. It doesn't say the metal was jewelry still fused to bone. For modern historians, this cold precision is almost more disturbing than the eruption itself. The volcano destroyed indiscriminately. The law sorted the wreckage. It assigned meaning, rank, and revenue to what nature had already erased. Law became a second layer of ash, one made of words instead of dust. It preserved the empire's dignity while burying its conscience. And this pattern didn't die with Rome. Every civilization inherits it. When catastrophe strikes, the first reflex is not compassion, it's administration. Forms, claims, reassessments. We call it recovery. But the word recover only means to bring something back under control. It's what the Romans did too, controlling even death with documents. In the ruins of Pompeii, archaeologists found a chest filled with bronze seals, each bearing the name of a magistrate. The chest was locked, preserved under meters of ash. The officials had tried to flee, carrying the tools of their trade. Not food, not family, but the symbols of bureaucracy. They died clutching legality in a world already past law. Their bodies were found seated in a circle, scrolls burned to ash beside them, hands frozen mid-stamp. It's almost poetic. As the volcano rewrote nature, the clerks tried to rewrite death. Today, those same seals rest in a museum display. Each one carries the emblem of the Roman eagle and the faint trace of fingerprints, reminders that even in their last moments, they were still serving the system. When we look at them, we're not just seeing artifacts, we're seeing obedience fossilized, the moment when order outlived morality. Pompeii wasn't just destroyed by lava and gas. It was finalized, notarized, sealed, and archived. Because to the empire, there was no such thing as tragedy, only property awaiting reassignment. When excavators reached the northern quarter of Pompeii in 1922, they found two figures fused together in the ash. At first, they looked like a single shape, one mass of white plaster, smooth and twisted. But as the brush cleared the dust, details appeared. A woman's arm curled over a man's shoulder, his face buried against her neck, their bodies locked so tightly that even death couldn't separate them. They called it the embrace. To visitors today, it looks romantic, a symbol of love surviving apocalypse. But archaeologists see something colder. The position of the bodies shows the man shielding the woman from the falling debris, her spine arched as she tried to breathe. This wasn't love's final act. It was reflex, protection against a world that had turned to poison. The plaster casts of Pompeii are among the most disturbing artifacts ever made. They aren't sculptures. They are negatives of human beings, voids left when flesh decayed. Liquid plaster poured into those voids fills the space where life once was, capturing every fold of cloth, every wrinkle of terror. They are perfect records of imperfection, fear, pain, instinct, frozen in calcium carbonate. In them, the human body becomes a message, not a monument. Each one says, "This happened, and this is what it cost." The pair from the northern quarter weren't nobles. The man's clothing shows simple fabric, the woman's sandals worn at the heel. They were ordinary, the kind of people history doesn't name. And yet, they have outlasted every emperor who ruled them. Their silence speaks louder than the orations of kings. When their cast was first unveiled, reporters called it the lovers of Pompeii. Tourists wept. Poets wrote of devotion enduring the fire. But the truth was more brutal. They weren't lovers at all. Later studies showed they were siblings, a brother and sister who died together, crushed in the same instant. The empire had erased their identities in life. Now, modern sentiment tried to rewrite them in death, because love is easier to look at than terror. The same year their bodies were displayed, Mussolini used the image for propaganda. He called them symbols of eternal Roman unity, two dead peasants turned into instruments of pride. History repeats its cruelty in disguise. Rome turned its corpses into property. The modern world turned them into myth. Because the dead are easiest to use when they can't object. Look closely at their faces, or what's left of them. The plaster preserves the faint imprint of veins, the open mouth of a gasp, the shallow dent where a tear would have been. It's as if the body itself became a camera, recording the last exposure of consciousness. Their eyes are gone, but the sockets look upward, not toward heaven, toward the ceiling that fell on them. Faith doesn't survive in those eyes. Only instinct does. They didn't die kneeling. They died refusing to fall apart. Around them, other casts tell other stories. A dog twisted in its chain, its spine arched as it tried to break free. A child curled beneath a bench, knees pulled to its chest. A man crouched against a wall, clutching a sack of coins that melted into his palm. Different people, same posture, reaching, shielding, clinging, the choreography of extinction. Every civilization creates this dance eventually. It calls it loyalty, faith, discipline. But in the end, all those words describe the same motion. Humans trying to hold on to something as the world burns. Standing before the impulse, you don't feel romance. You feel compression. Two people crushed into one form. not by choice, but by pressure. The pressure of ash, of history, of 1,000 years of being forgotten. And yet, they remain. When their bones rotted, the space they left behind became art. Absence became record. They proved that even anonymity can endure if the silence is heavy enough. That's the paradox of Pompeii. The empire died, claiming eternity, and the only immortals it produced were two unknowns who never asked for it. Today, the cast of the Embrace rests behind glass. Visitors whisper, photograph, move on. The air-conditioned room keeps the plaster cool, the lights soft. It feels respectful, almost holy. But sometimes, when the museum closes and the corridors empty, the spotlights dim just enough to make their shadows stretch long across the floor. And for a moment, you can almost see the ash fall again. You can almost hear the sound of stone breathing. Because they aren't statues, they're evidence that the most enduring monument to power is not marble, but the people crushed beneath it. They found her under the servants' stairs, a small space, barely wide enough to crawl into, a desperate shelter carved between a kitchen wall and the stone steps above it. Inside, 3 figures, a woman and 2 children. Her arms wrapped around both, her back curved toward the doorway, as if her body alone could block the fire. Archaeologists called her the Mother of Pompeii. Her face is gone, but the gesture remains. One hand pressed the younger child's head against her chest. The other reached outward, fingers splayed, not pleading, but resisting. The ash sealed them that way, preserving the moment when protection became anatomy. The space beneath the stairs tells more truth about humanity than all of Rome's marble temples. Because here, stripped of ceremony, law, or language, there was only one command left: shield. The temperature that day reached over 400 degrees Celsius. The air inside that crawl space would have boiled in seconds. Yet her posture shows she didn't hide behind the children. She hid them behind her. Her spine was found fused with theirs. Even in decomposition, her body stayed locked around them, a final reflex of instinct outlasting flesh. That's what makes Pompeii unbearable. Not how they died, but what they died doing. Upstairs, the house had belonged to a wealthy merchant. Mosaic floors, bronze lamps, a carved bust of the emperor. In the courtyard, the marble fountain was found cracked from the heat, the statue of Mercury face down in the dust. Below, in the service quarters, the family's slaves had built their own nests, straw mats, wooden bowls, half-eaten bread. The mother under the stairs wasn't the lady of the house. She worked there, a servant who tried to save her children while the owners fled toward the harbor. History doesn't record her name, but it kept her outline, and that outline indicts an entire civilization. Rome liked to think of itself as merciful. Its laws were filled with words like pietas, duty, devotion, moral order. But under the ash, pietas wasn't a virtue. It was muscle memory, a mother bending into a shield while the empire she served burned above her. When the cast of her body was first displayed in Naples in 1899, visitors were told she represented Roman motherhood. They missed the point. She didn't die because of motherhood. She died because the system that employed her had no place for her survival. The difference between the noble and the enslaved vanished in Pompeii's last hours, but not in the records afterward. Inscriptions and inventories recovered from nearby estates list missing slaves simply as perditi, lost assets, not lost lives. The law could reclaim property. It could not resurrect compassion. That's the hidden symmetry of the ruins. Above ground, marble statues of emperors survived, headless but standing. Below ground, women like her turned to ash but kept their form intact. Time chose which monuments deserved faces. Archaeologists found a small copper ring on her finger, crude, unpolished. Inside it, a single word scratched in hurried letters: Felix, lucky. Maybe it was her child's name. Maybe it was faith. Maybe it was sarcasm, carved by someone who had already learned how to laugh at fear. We'll never know. But that ring remains the smallest surviving fragment of humor inside a city of horror. A private joke carried into eternity. Every empire buries people like her. The anonymous, the essential, the unacknowledged. When disasters strike, it's always their faces that disappear first from the official story. The empire records its heroes, never its helpers. But in Pompeii, the ash reversed the hierarchy. The marble generals crumbled. The mother under the stairs became immortal. She outlasted everyone who owned her. She became the last act of Rome worth remembering. Not conquest, not law, but an instinct older than both. Stand before her cast, and you'll feel something that no inscription can translate. The curve of her arm isn't art, it's defiance. It says, "I will not give you my children, even if the air itself turns against me." That moment is frozen forever, more sacred than any temple that collapsed above her. Because when the empire's promises failed, and the gods turned silent, one woman still kept the oldest law of all, to protect what she loved, until the last breath turned to stone. It happened faster than thought. A single roar, deeper than thunder, sharper than any weapon, rolled down the mountain, shaking the earth like a heartbeat. Then came the light, a white so bright it erased color, sound, and shape. For one instant, every shadow vanished, and then the heat arrived. A pyroclastic surge, a hurricane of gas, ash, and molten stone moving at more than 100 kilometers per hour, hotter than 500 degrees Celsius, tore through the valley. It didn't burn, it obliterated. People caught in the open didn't have time to scream. The surge flash-boiled moisture in their lungs, rupturing them from the inside. Muscles contracted, jaws locked, bones curled inward. Every living thing in its path was transformed into an outline. The dead of Pompeii weren't buried. They were printed. One archaeologist described it perfectly. It was not death. It was a recording. At the city's edge, a group of soldiers guarding the gate were found kneeling, shields raised against the wind. Their armor fused to their ribs, their swords melted to their hands. They died still obeying command. Rome's discipline turned to sculpture in less than a second. In the harbor district, dozens of bodies were found clustered inside the boat sheds. They had fled toward the sea, thinking salvation lay beyond the smoke. But the water had boiled. They suffocated as the tide itself turned to steam. Some clutched jewelry, others keys. The instinct to preserve what was already lost, property, identity, illusion, outlasted the instinct to run. the surge didn't discriminate. It swept through temples and taverns alike. Statues of gods toppled beside shop stalls. Bronze bells rang once, then melted. The law courts, where justice was once declared in marble halls, collapsed under the same weight as the brothels. Everything became equal in temperature. That equality is what terrified later generations most. Because for the first time in Roman memory, power didn't matter. Titles didn't matter. Even prayer had no hierarchy. When nature delivered judgment, it didn't ask who was innocent. It asked who was there. The second surge followed minutes later, colder, slower, heavier. It filled the hollows, sealed the ruins, and completed the burial. The city vanished beneath 12 meters of stone. The sea retreated. The mountain quieted. And Pompeii became a myth before the ashes even cooled. From a distance, sailors on the horizon saw nothing. Just a grey horizon where once there had been vineyards and villas. They thought it was fog. They didn't know they were looking at the grave of 20,000 people. In Rome, the Senate received word weeks later. Messengers reported that a southern province had suffered unusual disturbances. That was the phrase, unusual disturbances, a euphemism for annihilation. Official decrees offered prayers to Vulcan, god of fire. Coins were minted to commemorate the divine cleansing of the region. The empire turned destruction into divinity. Even nature's wrath became propaganda. This was the final triumph of Rome, to take the language of loss and bend it into power. To declare, the gods did this for us. But under the ash, another kind of justice was written. Not divine, not human, geological. The pyroclastic surge did what no rebellion or invasion ever could. It exposed how fragile control really was. Pompeii's death wasn't punishment, it was revelation. It showed the empire that its marble couldn't outlast breath, that its law couldn't rewrite physics. It proved that for all Rome's pride, it was still made of lungs, flesh, and fear. The mountain didn't hate them. It simply revealed them. When modern volcanologists studied the layers of ash, they found something eerie. A pattern of pulses, almost rhythmic, as if the eruption came in measured breaths. Each surge lasted minutes. Inhale, exhale, destruction, silence. Nature breathing through catastrophe. Maybe that's the true irony. While Pompeii choked, the mountain breathed. And in that inversion lay the purest form of justice. Not moral, not vengeful, but natural. The exchange of air between arrogance and reality. Today, when you stand on the ridge above the ruins, the volcano looks peaceful. Green slopes, quiet wind, birds circling the crater. You wouldn't know it once boiled the world alive. But the ground still exhales warmth. And if you stand there long enough, you can feel it through your shoes. A slow, steady pulse, like something alive, waiting. Because justice never disappears. It only sleeps beneath the ash, waiting for the next civilization that mistakes power for permanence. When the roar stopped, nothing followed. No fire, no voices, no sound of falling stone, only stillness, the kind that feels alive, listening. The mountain exhaled one last plume of smoke, then went silent. The world above Pompeii had ended. The one below it had just begun. The city was gone, but it hadn't disappeared. It had been entombed. Ash doesn't destroy, it preserves. Within hours, the grey blanket hardened into a shell, sealing streets, homes, and bodies in place. Wood decayed, flesh vanished, but everything else, tools, bread, coins, graffiti, stayed exactly as it was. A city, mid-breath, paused in eternity. That preservation is what makes Pompeii unbearable. It's not a ruin, it's a freeze frame. A moment of human terror suspended so perfectly that even 2 millennia later, you can still walk its streets and feel the air tighten. The ruts of wagon wheels remain in the stone. Wine jars sit upright in taverns. A loaf of bread lies carbonized in an oven. A dog's chain stretches taut from a wall. It's not imagination. It's evidence that time itself can hesitate. But while Pompeii slept beneath its tomb, the empire above continued breathing. Ships still sailed, senators still debated, soldiers still marched. To Rome, the loss of one coastal town didn't matter. The empire's machine ran on indifference. The ledgers were balanced, the taxes reallocated, the disaster filed under acts of the gods. And the silence beneath the mountain deepened. No one came to dig. No one came to mourn. Within a generation, no one even remembered the city's name. Pompeii became a rumor, then a ghost, then nothing. The irony is cruel. The same ash that killed its people also made them immortal. Every victim sealed inside became a page in a book that wouldn't be opened for nearly 2,000 years. A record written not in ink, but in suffocation. When archaeologists finally unearthed it in the 18th century, they thought they'd discovered a lost civilization. They didn't realize they were interrupting one still in progress. Because what Pompeii preserved wasn't Rome's past, it was its reflection. Everything the empire valued, wealth, beauty, obedience, lay fossilized alongside its victims. The frescoes show laughter and luxury. The streets show commerce and law. Even brothels survived, their walls carved with prices and names. Pompeii's perfection outlived its people. That's what makes it feel haunted. The order still intact, the souls erased. In one house, archaeologists found a wax tablet still bearing a legal record, a property dispute awaiting judgment. The case was never decided. The last entry reads, "Hearing postponed to the next market day." That day never came. In another, a pot of coins lay beside a half-written letter. "We hear the noise from the mountain. Tell my brother not to worry." The writer never finished the sentence. The letter burned. The words survived. Pompeii became the only place where silence could be read aloud. Centuries of explorers treated it like treasure. They carved tunnels, stole statues, looted frescoes. Kings displayed the casts in their palaces as curiosities. Death arranged like theatre. Even in resurrection, Pompeii was exploited. History's victims were forced to perform again. But the city resisted. The more it was exposed, the more horrifying its clarity became. People realized they weren't looking at relics. They were looking at themselves, their habits, their comforts, their denial. A mirror made of ash. Today, when you walk through its streets, you can still hear the faint sound of sandals against stone, the echo of lives interrupted. Every corner whispers the same warning. Nothing collapses suddenly. Every disaster begins with someone saying, "It's nothing. It will pass." Pompeii was buried not just by ash, but by certainty. The belief that civilization is stronger than nature, that tomorrow will always look like today. The city entombed beneath Vesuvius is proof that tomorrow is never guaranteed. The philosopher Seneca once wrote, years before the eruption, "We live as if we are eternal, but we die as if we have just begun to live." Pompeii is that sentence made physical, a city caught between eternity and interruption. Its streets still stand, its colors still glow, its people still reach upward, frozen in the act of realizing too late. And maybe that's the lesson the mountain left us, that silence is not the end of history. Sometimes, silence is history, a record written in ash, waiting for the next empire that forgets how fragile permanence really is. When the first plaster cast of a human body emerged from Pompeii's ash in 1863, the crowd fell silent. For centuries, the city had been legend, an echo of marble, myth, and tragedy. But that day, legend became flesh again. The archaeologist Giuseppe Fiorelli had poured liquid plaster into a hollow where a body had decomposed. When it hardened and the surrounding ash was chipped away, a form appeared. A man lying face down, one hand shielding his face, the other reaching forward, frozen in a gesture of panic. The plaster preserved everything: wrinkles, fingernails, even the folds of his tunic. For the first time in history, death looked back. The discovery changed archaeology forever. It turned the ground itself into a camera. Every void a photograph, every body a negative. Each cast captured not the moment of death, but the second before it. The instant of realization. Crowds gathered to watch the excavations. They wept, whispered, prayed. Reporters wrote that the dead seemed still alive, as if the soul had just departed. Pain had become spectacle again, only now it was dressed as science. Fiorelli called his method resurrection by plaster. It wasn't poetic exaggeration, that's what it felt like, conjuring ghosts through chemistry. But with every new cast, the moral line blurred further, because to resurrect someone is also to expose them, to turn private terror into public evidence. The victims of Pompeii never consented to be displayed, yet their faces now live behind glass, under lights, staring at tourists who photograph them as curiosities. They survived oblivion only to become exhibits. The empire had turned them into statistics. Modernity turned them into souvenirs. In the 20th century, new technologies deepened the illusion of resurrection. CT scans and X-rays peered inside the plaster, revealing bones, jewelry, teeth, even last meals. One child was found with a string of small seashells, a toy. Another had a crust of bread still clenched in her hand. Scientists reconstructed their diets, their diseases, their bloodlines. Every discovery brought them closer, yet also stranger. Because the more we learned, the less we could ignore the truth. We were reading the intimate details of people who never wanted to be remembered like this. In recent years, AI has joined the excavation. Algorithms reassemble faces from CT data, predicting skin tones, eye colors, expressions. Digital artists rebuild entire rooms, repopulate them with reconstructions of the dead. The result is uncanny. Pompeii reborn in pixels, vivid, moving, breathing. But behind the beauty lies a question no machine can answer. When does remembering become reenactment? The same empire that once glorified its victims in marble now glorifies them in simulation. Both claim to preserve history. Both feed on awe. In one recent project, researchers reconstructed the face of a man found near the city gate. He had died instantly. A roof beam crushed his chest. The AI rendering showed him as middle-aged, strong-jawed, dark-haired. They projected his face on a screen in a museum. Visitors said he looked alive, but no algorithm could capture the real story, that this man likely spent his final seconds gasping, trying to crawl through smoke, believing rescue was still possible. The reconstruction gave him a face. It couldn't give him dignity. Forensic resurrection blurs the line between knowledge and resurrection myth. We dig, scan, print, and model as if refusing to let the dead stay dead. Maybe it's guilt. Maybe it's pride. Maybe we can't bear to accept that what buried Pompeii wasn't just a volcano. It was our own fascination with permanence. Every generation that unearths the city repeats the same ritual. Open the tomb, call it education, then look too long. We tell ourselves it's empathy, but empathy isn't staring. Empathy is silence, and silence is the one thing Pompeii no longer has. There's a photograph of Fiorelli taken in 1875. He stands beside one of his casts, hand resting lightly on its shoulder, like a priest at confession. The caption reads, "A citizen of Pompeii revived." That phrase lingers, because resurrection always flatters the living more than it comforts the dead. It lets us pretend we're different, that our technology makes us kinder than the empire we condemn. But the plaster tells another story. The expressions of those faces are not peace. They are endurance, the silent endurance of people history keeps digging up, century after century, still waiting to be left alone. Vesuvius is quiet now. Tourists hike its slopes, snapping photos of the crater that once swallowed a city. Vendors sell keychains shaped like the volcano. From Naples, you can see its green silhouette at sunset, peaceful, almost beautiful. But beneath that calm, pressure builds again. Gas, magma, silence. The mountain is not dead, it is sleeping, and humanity has built its home on the chest of a sleeping god. Nearly 3 million people live around Vesuvius today. Cities have crept up its flanks like ivy reclaiming a ruin. Apartments, highways, schools, all inside the official red zone, the area certain to be obliterated in the next major eruption. Scientists know it's inevitable. They can even predict the early tremors. But when asked how long the mountain has left, they always give the same answer: soon enough. And the people nod, smile, and continue their lives, because denial is easier than distance. You can't move 3 million souls away from a mountain that defines who they are. Every civilization builds its monuments on borrowed time. The Romans believed Vesuvius was a symbol of fertility, the soil rich, the vineyards thriving. Today's residents believe the same. The land is good for farming, good for tourism, good for property values, until it isn't. Local politicians promise safety. Evacuation plans exist, on paper. Drills are conducted once a year, often late, often ignored. It's a familiar rhythm, the same faith that once doomed Pompeii, modernized and subsidized. Technology has changed. Human nature hasn't. At night, sensors on the mountain blink red, monitoring seismic whispers. The data streams to labs and satellites, to scientists who map the mountain's pulse in lines and numbers. Every tremor is a breath. Every rise in pressure, a heartbeat. The mountain lives. And like all living things, it will eventually exhale. When it does, it will arise again. Not as divine punishment, but as repetition. Nature's way of reminding us that progress is not immunity. Standing on the crater rim today, you can feel the warmth beneath your feet. It seeps through the rock, subtle but steady. The air smells faintly of sulfur, the same scent that once made Pompeians glance up and then look away. Down below, Naples sprawls like a sea of lights, a modern empire, unaware that it glows in the shadow of its own history. If you listen closely, the wind carries a hum, the sound of steam escaping from vents along the crater's edge. The same breath that once turned men to statues. In museums, the plaster casts of Pompeii stare out at visitors. But the real resurrection has already happened. We have rebuilt the same mistake. We live closer to volcanoes, to floodplains, to fault lines, believing that sensors, drones, and algorithms will save us where prayers once failed. We call it progress, but maybe it's the same denial, gilded with technology, translated into data. We no longer worship the gods who destroy us, we simply underestimate them. In 1944, Vesuvius erupted again. Allied troops watched from nearby airfields as ash blanketed their plains. Villages burned, yet the world called it minor. Because compared to Pompeii, everything feels survivable. That's the problem with memory. The last catastrophe always feels final, so the next one never feels real. Geologists say the next eruption will not be kind. Pressure is rising. The magma chamber is restless. When it bursts, it won't be slow. It will be instant. No warning long enough to matter. Just heat, light, and the return of silence. The irony is complete. The same species that once prayed for mercy now live streams its own extinction. The same mountain that once buried a city now watches us build one larger in its place. We say it's resilience, but resilience without memory is repetition. Sometimes, on clear nights, the crater emits a faint glow. Locals call it the mountain's eye. They say it watches Naples sleep. That glow isn't mystical. It's gas, heat, friction, the heart of something vast and patient, remembering its own power. It doesn't roar anymore. It waits. And when it breathes again, no law, no empire, no algorithm will negotiate with it. Because nature has no reason to forgive. It only remembers. History calls Pompeii a tragedy. But tragedy implies accident, something unforeseen, undeserved, beyond control. Pompeii wasn't that. It was the natural conclusion of a civilization that mistook mastery for immortality. They built a city beneath a volcano and called it progress. They worshipped order and ignored the tremors beneath their feet. They trusted the empire to protect them, not realizing the empire was built on the same illusion. That power can outlive consequence. 2,000 years later, we still tell the same story, only now the volcano has changed its name. Every age invents its own Vesuvius. For Rome, it was the mountain. For us, it's everything we believe we've tamed: the climate, the market, the machine. We call it control, but control is just the art of postponing collapse. We pave floodplains and call them neighborhoods. We feed fire and call it industry. We bury warnings in reports and call it optimism. And when the ground shakes again, as it always does, we look up, shocked, and say, no one could have known. But someone always knows. They just get buried first. The story of Pompeii is not about lava. It's about silence. About how long a society can hear the rumble beneath it and choose not to move. The people of Pompeii didn't lack knowledge. They lacked permission. They waited for priests, for orders, for the empire to decide whether the danger was real. And by the time the empire spoke, there was nothing left to save. That's what happens when control becomes faith, when obedience replaces instinct. In the ruins, the inscriptions still whisper that lesson. On a wall near the forum, "Fortune favors the bold." The words survived. The writer didn't. On another, scratched into the plaster of a bathhouse, "Enjoy life. Tomorrow is uncertain." The tomorrow he warned about came that afternoon. These aren't just graffiti. They're data, the last notes of a society recording its own denial. Modern archaeology calls Pompeii a closed system. Every grain of ash accounted for, every layer mapped, every body catalogued. It is perfect, sterile, complete. A city that will never change again. But that perfection is the horror. Pompeii is what happens when life becomes record. When every movement, every object, every gasp is preserved, but the voices are gone. The empire achieved its dream of permanence. It just didn't survive to enjoy it. When the first tourists walked its streets in the 18th century, they felt awe. They saw eternity carved in stone. But eternity isn't peace. It's paralysis. That's the cost of control. You can freeze the world in order. You just can't live in it. Today, satellites track Vesuvius with exquisite precision. Scientists can model every cubic meter of magma beneath its surface. We can predict the next eruption within hours. And yet, if it happened tomorrow, thousands would still die. Because prediction doesn't equal preparation. Information doesn't equal courage. We've built better tools, not better instincts. The mountain still breathes, and the world still crowds around its feet, believing this time will be different. That's the most Roman thing of all, because Rome was never defeated by enemies. It was defeated by its own certainty, by the belief that law and architecture and reason could bargain with the earth. Pompeii is the contract they signed, and nature's signature at the bottom. If you walk its streets today at dusk, the stones still hold the warmth of the sun. The shadows of columns stretch long, and the plaster casts lie silent in glass cases, their mouths open mid-breath. It's easy to think they're calling out to us. They aren't. They're exhaling, releasing what the empire never could, its illusion of control. Pompeii wasn't punished. It was revealed. And in that revelation, every civilization can see itself. The moment before the ash, the breath before the silence, the certainty before the collapse. The ledger of history always closes the same way, not with conquest, but with quiet. When the mountain breathes again, it won't roar, it will whisper, and those who listen too late will mistake that whisper for peace. Because the last sound of every empire is the sound of its own denial turning to dust.